One thing we can all agree we've heard countless amounts of times since the show first aired is that Rent-A-Girlfriend is an absolute dumpster fire cringe fest of an anime. You've heard it, you've seen it, you've typed it, hell, you've probably read it more times than I can possibly count, because apparently the show is just that garbage. However, there were two particular things that started to occur to me as I kept on watching season 2 airing this season. First of all, I never really found myself loathing a new release or forcing myself to watch a new episode, which made me wonder something. Why has no one really said anything good about this series? So with that thought in mind, I said, you know what, why not? And went back and rewatched the entirety of season 1 to catch myself up. And not only did I not find the show as cringe as I thought I would, but I genuinely enjoyed the entire ride, to the point where I went online afterwards to read the online chapters, something I almost never do. Seeing this, I started wondering something. For a show that's probably the most hated piece of anime to come out in recent years, how is it so enjoyable? How can a show with such low regard be so captivating at the same time? And so I watched it a third time, not only disregarding anything that would recognize the show as cringe, but started to look for the highlights, the things that made this series not a dumpster fire, but a beautiful piece of writing masked behind such assumptions. And surprisingly, I found plenty of redeeming qualities, enough that I want to try to convince all of you, right now, that this show could very well be on the same writing caliber as something like Horimiya in terms of something like relatability. So long as we acknowledge that this show is the much more horny, awkward counterpart. Rent-A-Girlfriend focuses around college student Kinoshita Kazuya, a lonely guy whose introduction starts with getting dumped by his girlfriend of 1 month, which isn't really something to brag about. Through his grief in this and a few sussy moments, Kazuya stumbles across a girlfriend rental service, where you pay money to who you want to, quote, go on a date with, and this service is to act as a way for clients to get past their prior relationships and keep their lives together. Through this app, Kazuya goes on a pseudo date with Mizuhara Chizuru, a beautiful girl reminiscent of an idol, and thoroughly enjoys his time doing so. However, he soon realizes that it's all an act, and after renting another date and criticizing Chizuru, only for her to show what her real cold personality is like by shooting back about how it's part of the job, the two end up with each other in the hospital after Kazuya's grandmother collapses, and after the two end up accidentally lying that they're dating for real, as well as running into Chizuru's grandmother who's friends with Grandma Kinoshita, the two have to keep up the act that they're dating for real in order to hide Chizuru's job as a rental girlfriend, which becomes even more complicated once they find out their neighbors living in the same dorm complex. Fucking Christ, it takes so much to explain, that's not even half of it. In short, the story premise is admittedly pretty scuffed, so it's understandable for newcomers to hear that summary and opt out due to hearing that, or the various negative comments about the show, be it about how Kazuya needs to relax, being an idiot, a beta male, you name it, it probably describes Kazuya. Not to mention that when you throw in the other 3 females of the show, including Kazuya's psychopathic ex Nanami Mami, the equally horny Sarashina Ruka, and the cute, shy, wholesome entity Sakurosawa Sumi, who is probably one of the main saving graces of the show, needless to say, it gets a little chaotic. Throw in everything about Kazuya being a beta who's more indecisive than a teenage girl at the drive-thru window at McDonald's, as well as everything about Chizuru hiding her job as a rental girlfriend. Yeah, poor execution can turn this show into an absolute dumpster fire. Right? See, what I think a lot of people tend to overlook for the sake of shitposting about the anime is Kazuya does have some pretty real character development. Ignoring the fact that he's, let's just say, in touch with his hormones, you know what I'm talking about, you hog-basting motherfucker. He surprisingly pushes through all of that due to the blossoming commitment he has for his genuine feelings for Chizuru, which don't form just because he's gone on fake dates with her. He acknowledges that he's not exactly a role model of a human being, and yet, for someone who's not actually dating the person he comes to like, despite pretending, he'll still do things that take a lot of courage and personal risk, which is something that I've come to like about Kazuya. Plus, thinking about it past that, he's not actually a bad guy. He cares about his friends, and despite having some interesting thoughts, he doesn't act on his impulses, even in situations where you might be pressured into it. And while most viewers see this as him being a beta male cucking himself, I see a man with a very strong moral compass. He's not the type of person to do something with someone for the sake of doing it. It still has to have some sort of meaning to it, and that unexpected resolve is why Chizuru develops a rather high level of trust for him. Now, while it's easy to criticize Chizuru for her abnormal job, once you know why she's doing it, it actually makes a lot of sense. After all, Chizuru's an aspiring actor, so with the rental gig not only acting as a source of income, but as live acting practice, which is vital in such an experience-heavy industry. On top of that, since she spent a lot of her free time working on her acting itself, as well as going out of her way to hide her identity at school to make sure nobody recognizes her from her job, this leaves very little room to have a social life, showing just how serious she is about making this her career path. But that aside, that's not what makes Chizuru so special. Initially thinking of Kazuya purely as a nuisance client who she has to keep up business relations with for the sake of pleasing their grandparents, anything can happen when you're with someone for an entire year, even if it's just pretend. And hints confirming this theory begin to subtly drop as the show progresses further and further. The more time she spends with him, and the more time she gets to know the kind of person Kazuya is, the more she sees that he's a lot more considerate and loyal than his awkward outer shell lets off. So while it does take a while, and I mean a long while, God, it takes so fucking long, she does start to get more comfortable around him, and instead finds a bit of humor in his antics, and even starts to ask him for favors, treating him more as a friend than a client as time goes on, despite what she says. That said, none of that really addresses the major issues a lot of people have with this series, being the pacing and the god-awful slow character progression. Admittedly, I find this pretty damn funny, considering how usually people end up complaining that the pacing was too fast or that there wasn't enough character progression. Sure, the pacing of the plot and the characters is slower than a snail trying to climb a hill covered in oil, but in the very least, it's thorough. You get a proper amount of time to explore not only the main characters, but even the side characters. And while the author of the manga series catches shade for being so slow with the progression, it takes a lot of patience and resolve to take your time and squeeze in all the little details rather than rush the project. For better or for worse, you can feel as if you're growing with these characters at a pace that better fits how you may grow as a person yourself. Being awkward, making mistakes, taking chances, chasing unrealistic dreams that may never one day come to fruition. It's all part of what shapes you and makes you who you are, even if you start out as a bit of a sussy little guy who's a little too lonely for his own good. In the very least, if you're one of those people that consistently shits on the show, I ask this. No, I challenge this. Rewatch everything from the beginning. Not to find things to criticize Kazuya, but to find things that make you think you can relate to him on a personal level, be it current or past experiences, and take that into consideration when looking at how Chizuru and the others fit into this as well. Who knows? You might find yourself thinking the show isn't that bad after all.